superstar, Rajinikanth, having defended CAA, having defended NPR, but not NRC, I'll come to that in a minute, has done the right thing in condemning the failure of the Union Home Ministry and the intelligence agencies for not responding to the situation as it should be. He said, suppress this. This is what? Is he talking about the anti-CAA protests, or is he talking about the violence? I think he was asked and he said, this violence, people have a right to protest peacefully and all that, but you should put it down with an iron hand, he said. And if you can't do it, and that is significant, resign and go. So I welcome that kind of righteous anger, but hope that he will understand what is at stake when you're talking about the anti-CAA, anti-NRC, anti-NPR protests. And that, I think, is my job today. I'll try to explain why Mr. Rajinikanth and various others like him, who seem to have not looked deeply into the question, should come out in opposition in whatever way they choose, even writing, thinking, even privately, publicly, whatever, against what is being attempted. And there's a useful statement by Mr. Rajinikanth, which was made to the press, which has been widely reported, and it's also tweeted. The Citizenship Amendment Act will not affect any citizen of our country. Proposition number 1. I'm quoting. If it affects Muslims, then I'll be the first person to stand up for them. And the second proposition is, NPR is a necessity to find out about the outsiders. NPR is a necessity to find out about the outsiders. You can call them outsiders, foreigners, illegal migrants, infiltrators, termites, to use Mr. Amit Shah's language, whatever. But they have come here without legal papers, a passport and so on, or if they had passports, their passports have expired, are no longer valid. That is the meaning of illegal infiltrators. Again, I want to call attention to the use of language. It goes back to the Constituent Assembly debates. Hindus who came from West Pakistan by some communal elements or narrow-minded elements were called refugees. Muslims who went to Pakistan during the partition, all the violence and the uncertainty, and returned, large number returned, for example, from Karachi to Mumbai and so on, to Bombay. They were called migrants, and also evacuee property and so on. So the language itself was there, but the law, as has been mentioned, and the constitutional provisions make no distinction between Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, and so on, and we have plenty on record on that. For example, when the matter came up before the Constituent Assembly, Jawaharlal Nehru said, yeah, these are complicated problems, we have made rules, but you can't make separate rules for Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims, and others, he said. And in a famous intervention on August 12, 1949, Alladi Krishnasamy Iyer, a leading jurist who had a major role in the drafting committee, along with under the leadership of Jawaharlal Nehru, Dr. Ambedkar, and so on, he said, we are plighted to the principles of a secular state. We cannot on any racial or religious or other ground make a distinction between one kind of persons and another, or one set of persons and another set of persons, having regard to our commitments to the formulation of our policy. This, I think, is important, and there is, until the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019 came onto the scene, was enacted, that bill was made into law, there has not been a single provision relating to citizenship in the Constitution or in the laws which use religion as the differentiator in conferring citizenship. And going back to the third proposition of Mr. Rajinikanth, it has been clarified that NRC has not been formulated yet. If you understand what is the reality in relation to these assertions, I think you will understand what is at stake today. This simple thing. One, CAA will not affect any citizen of our country. If it affects Muslims, I'll be the first person to, that's an addition, to stand up for them. NPR is a necessity to find out about outsiders. NPR is National Population Register. NRC has not yet been, it has been clarified that NRC has not been formulated yet. Now, what is citizenship? Citizenship is nowhere defined in the Constitution or even in the Citizenship Act of 1955, which has been amended right up to 2019. The matter came up in the Constituent Assembly debates, and it was decided that there is no need to define citizenship. Because those who are born in India before a particular date, they are citizens of India. And your parents were born in India, you're citizens of India. And after 1987, this changed. Various complications came onto the scene, largely because of communal politics, largely because of the rise of Hindutva. Hindutva doesn't accept the Constitution. If you go back to the writings of Golwalkar and others, and even Savarkar as the founder of the originator of the concept of Hindutva, nowhere will you find, they do not accept the fundamental premises of our republic, the Constitution itself. They had a different kind of Constitution in mind. I don't want to go into the details. But ever since they were able to gain mileage in the political arena and the electoral arena, the citizenship law changed. The Congress was also complicit in it in many respects. There's no doubt about it. I don't want to go into the details, into the history of this. But it is, after 87, it was no longer enough to be born in India, within the territory of India. Other considerations were brought into the picture of citizenship. Before the current crisis of citizenship, citizenship was if you have a voter identity card, then you are a citizen. A passport could be given only to citizens. Citizenship is different from nationality. You can be an Indian origin person, your Indian nationals can live abroad and not even have citizenship. Nationality has to be seen in different light from citizenship. But what is citizenship? The legal status of citizenship has been conceptualized by scholars as the threshold for above which you enjoy rights, economic rights, constitutional rights, political rights in full. Citizenship is a rights-bearing business or status. That is what citizenship is. And citizenship is meaningless unless you are able to enjoy the rights guaranteed or provided by the Constitution of India. Now, even now, they cannot define citizenship. So for Mr. Rajinikanth to say that CAA does not affect any citizen of the country is to beg the question of what is citizenship. And many people, lawyers and others, legal scholars have made a strong case, a compelling case for the CAA being struck down as unconstitutional. There are many petitions before the court, Supreme Court of India, and we hope that the Supreme Court of India will strike it down because it is blatantly constitutional. There's an excellent article by Mihir Desai, a senior lawyer practicing in the Bombay High Court, published in the Economic and Political Weekly, dated February 15th, 2020, comprehensive and very, very clear, titled CAA, NRC, NPR and its discontents. You can look it up. or if you need I'll be happy to provide it to anyone who leaves their email here. For those who want to understand this deeply, I think it's a very, very good start. And he makes some simple points here, some basic propositions. He argues that CAA is unconstitutional, and he gives the reasons for it. I'll come to that in a minute. And he says that and it should be struck down by the Supreme Court. However, if it is not struck down by the Supreme Court, the protest should continue because they are justified. And if the CAA is not struck down as unconstitutional, in any case, the NRC and NPR and NRC should be objected to or opposed. So there is good ground for this movement, this upsurge against this major injustice, this assault on our constitution, on secularism, and on the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. In particular, equality and fraternity in this particular case. Liberty is also under attack, as has been mentioned. But that is what is at stake. So why is the CAA unconstitutional? It violates basically Article 14 of the Constitution. Please read Article 14. Unlike Article 19 of the Constitution, fundamental rights guaranteed only for citizens, 14 guarantees equality before the law and equal protection of the law for all persons within the territory of India. Anyone here, citizen or not, is guaranteed has the right to equality, what is provided by Article 14. And lawyers, including Chidambaram, Mr. P. Chidambaram, who has spoken very effectively on this question, very clearly, have pointed out that Article 14 doesn't prohibit classification. Classification, you can classify. Unequals will not be treated equally. You can classify for groups. But there are two tests for the legality or constitutionality of classification. One is what they call intelligent differentia. Venkatesh, adukku enna Tamil? புத்திசாலித்தனமான பிரிக்கின்ற ஏற்பாடு, differentia. And this differentia should be related to the object of the legislation, of the law that you are adopting. It should be reasonable. And but even if you pass these tests, the act cannot be arbitrary. Tannichayagava? Arbitrary. It should not, if it's arbitrary, it will still be struck down. And I quote now from P. Chidambaram's excellent speech made in the Rajya Sabha, where he's raised these questions. Senior advocate, former Home Minister, former Finance Minister, and so on. One, how do you group three countries, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, and leave out the other neighbors? Two, how do you identify only 6 religious groups, Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, Jain, Parsi, Christian, and leave out others like Ahmadiyas, Hazaras, Rohingyas? 3, Abrahamic religions are 3, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Why have you included Christianity and left out the other two? 4, why have you excluded Sri Lankan Hindus and Bhutanese Christians? I'm quoting from Chidambaram's Rajya Sabha speech before the bill became law. So he says, look at the exclusionary, inclusionary hyphenation. Sri Lanka is excluded, Hindus are included. Bhutan is excluded, Christians are included. When you hyphenate, the effect is Sri Lankan Hindus are excluded, Bhutanese Christians are excluded. And this hyphenation is beyond common sense and logic, to quote Chidambaram. 5, why only religious persecution? Are people not persecuted for political reasons? Are people not persecuted on linguistic grounds? Are people not persecuted by unleashing internal wars against them? Why not every kind of persecution? So when you make a classification, you have to answer these questions. And lawyers will argue this in the Supreme Court. Does or does not the bill violate the 3 fundamental elements of Article 14? First, equality before law. Unequals cannot be treated as equals. 2, unreasonable classification or irrational classification. And the third thing, which came from judge-made law, that even if the classification is reasonable, if it is arbitrary, it can be struck down. And therefore, Chidambaram has accused the BJP government of introducing a new ground for acquiring citizenship by arbitrary executive fiat. We have to see how this fares in the Supreme Court, but regardless of what the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court has come out with some, I think, some unjust decisions in the recent past. We are free to criticize decisions of the Supreme Court. If you don't agree with them, you can't attribute motives to judges or the judges as judges. And so the CAA, we'll have to watch this, is clearly unconstitutional according to many of us. But this is a matter that is still open-ended and will be settled only when those cases are heard. But what about the NRC and the NPR? Back to Mr. Rajinikanth's statement, NPR is needed for finding out who are outsiders. They have clarified, so take their word for it. They are not even considering doing an NRC. NRC outside Assam. What he should understand is, and what everybody should understand is, that the matter was, you have to go back to 2003, when the Citizenship Act was amended to introduce the concept for the first time in India of a national register for citizens. Now, I want to point out that this is a demand that has come only from the BJP, from its election manifesto. The first time it came onto the agenda was in 1989, when the BJP's election manifesto ahead of the Lok Sabha election said the BJP will maintain a national register of citizens. And in 1991, they went on to say again, we will maintain a national register of citizens, and they promised stern action against infiltrators, declared all property deals between locals and infiltrators as null and void. And this largely concerned the northeast and or eastern states. This continued right through the time of the rise of the BJP, 1996, in the manifesto, 98, 99, and 2004, 2014, they were very careful. It only said that it will address the issue of infiltration and illegal immigration in the northeast region on a priority basis. This will include clear policy directions, because at that time perhaps they were not clear, they were not confident about getting a majority in the Lok Sabha. But emboldened by an increased majority after the 2019 Lok Sabha election, and expecting it, their manifesto, even before they got the majority, they said we are committed to the enactment of the Citizenship Amendment Bill, which had already been introduced and referred to a standing committee, but had lapsed, for the protection of individuals, etc. And they spoke about, we will expeditiously complete the national registration of citizens in Assam and actively consider its extension to the other states. And I don't want to go into the specifics of Mr. Amit Shah's statements during the election campaign. when he laid out the sequence clearly that first we'll pass this bill, Citizenship Amendment Bill, and then we will do an NRC and weed out all the infiltrators, and on occasion he called them termites and so on. So to say that the NRC is not under consideration is not true, to put it mildly. It is not based on what we know. The Home Ministry report also says it, and the President's address after Mr. Modi, the BJP's victory this time in 2019, made it very clear that they are planning to do a countrywide NRC, maybe in phases. Today they are saying that since 2014, they have not even discussed it. That's what Mr. Modi himself has said. That is not true. Now, what happens if you keep the NRC in abeyance, not talk about the NRC, clarify that they are not considering that? The reality is the National Population Register has been notified. From April 1st to September, this will be conducted. It is not part of the census. The NPR, if you look at the amendment in 2003 and the rules that were introduced under the amendment to the Citizenship Act of 1955, you will see that the only purpose of the NPR is to provide a basis for the NRC. There is no other purpose. It has nothing to do with the census. It's not under the Census Act. The only purpose is to provide a basis or a base for a NRC. In other words, unlike Assam was completely different. There the NRC was based on a house-to-house enumeration. And you know what happened, the horrific experience of doing an NRC in Assam. In the first round, 4 million people were left out. That is, 40 lakh people were left out of a population of 33 million or so. Some 33 million people applied, and a large number were left out. Then people went and complained, appealed, and so on. And in the final draft, which was produced in August of 2019, 1.9 million people were left out. 19 lakh people were out. They were either treated as foreigners or they were stateless. And the next step was to send them to detention camps. Not all of it have been built, but plans are there. And unfortunately for the BJP, out of the 1.9 million, 1.3 were found to be Hindus, including Bengalis, but not all Bengalis, local people, those who had come from other states. And you have had, press has published reports that the family members of a former president were declared foreigners. They were not involved. The soldier who fought in the Kargil conflict was out. Many women who had no documents, after they were married, they went to from a village, went to another village. They could not find any documentation. If there were discrepancies in the names, spellings, they were also excluded. So the NRC was a dismal failure. A certain number of suicides happened. People became bankrupt because of the medical expenses. And those who were detained really suffered badly. It was a disastrous, calamitous exercise. And the BJP today doesn't talk about it, the government. Nobody knows what is the status of the Assam NRC, that final draft, because it doesn't suit them. The NRC in other places will not be done on a house-to-house basis. There will be no house-to-house enumeration. That is what the job of the National Population Register is. Here we have to respond to one objection raised by the BJP. They say that NPR was done in 2010 under the UPA. It is a fact. But nowhere if you see the questionnaire for 2010, nowhere is there any reference to citizenship. There is no question on citizenship. It is still a mystery, as some writers have pointed out, why they did this National Population Register exercise, because that was only under the Citizenship Act and the rules there under that. The only explanation that has been suggested is it was done to link Aadhaar, because they were obsessed with this Aadhaar and biometrics and so on. And the only possible explanation of why they did it, they did not link it with citizenship, was to provide a link to Aadhaar to gain that information. But that has given a bit of a handle to the present government to say, if they do it, it's good. If we do it, it's bad. And we cannot run away from this question. And in fact, the Congress party, as the leader of the alliance, is, I think, bound to answer people like Nandan Nilekani and others. What was the purpose of this NPR in 2010? You can't run away from that question. But it's clear that it had nothing to do with citizenship. They did an update of it in 2015, and they are now threatening to do it. We have the list of questions, and the most material addition is, the most toxic addition is, for those who fear that there will be communal profiling and targeting, is the question of date and place of birth of your parents. Because the law has already changed, that earlier birth, after 1987, if one parent, you can prove that one parent, the burden of proof is on you. If one parent is a citizen, then you are entitled to citizenship. But after 2014, the law was changed again, that if one parent is a citizen, if you can prove that one parent is a citizen, you also had to prove that the other parent, usually the wife, is not an illegal migrant or infiltrator, a person who is illegally here without proper papers. And you had to prove it. The burden of proof is on you to do it. So that is why bona fide citizens of India can be targeted by this if they wanted to do it. And who is going to do it? They have also said that you don't have to necessarily answer those questions. You have to respond. It's self-attestation. You don't have to provide any documents at the time of responding to the NPR. But your fate is in the hand of the local registrar at the locality level and district level, block level and district level. And then there is an appeals process. So if you fail to satisfy the registrar for whatever reason, he will mark you D. D is doubtful citizen. Doubtful citizen. And imagine the inconvenience, the harassment that will follow, and also imagine the scope for corruption that is built into this whole exercise. If this matter is there, you just make a statement, I'm a citizen. I don't want to answer your question on my parents' birth and place of birth of my parents. There are also other questions about Aadhaar, about driving license, and all that. You don't have to answer any of those questions, but the risk is on you. They don't say that, but obviously it's true, that if they come to the impression that you are D, then the burden of proof is on you, because you got to register in the registry of citizenship later. So this is what is involved. The NPR is the first step, the first stage of a process for the construction of a national register of citizens. And this is where people like Mr. Rajinikanth and others need to inform themselves better, more deeply by studying this matter. The NPR and the NRC cannot be separated. They are joined in the hip. At most, there's a sequence. They may decide not to do the NRC right now, not to implement the NRC, but the NRC, I repeat, does not involve house-to-house enumeration. It's not a separate process. It is merely an administrative process. After that, you already have this information. You can produce the NRC after taking certain administrative steps and going through certain procedures, including, to be fair, the right to appeal. up to a certain point, but the final decision will be taken by the Foreigners' Tribunal. And you know what happened in Assam when the Foreigners' Tribunal met. Natural justice was violated, and they did not even meet persons before deciding the fate in many cases. We had a meeting earlier in this very auditorium where this was explained by a journalist who had really gone deep into this question, who had reported on it, and she gave us, she made a presentation for some of you who may have attended that. So we know what has happened. But this is the reality about it, which is why we should take this seriously. But there's no need for alarmist reactions to this, that all is lost and so on. This because it can still be resisted. Many state governments have come out opposing, of course, the NRC, given this state, but they want the NPR. In Bihar, the assembly, including BJP members, went along with a resolution. The assembly adopted a resolution with nobody opposing it, again saying we won't do the no NRC, but and we'll do an NPR, but based on the 2010 format. Mr. Nitish Kumar has said. I don't know what that means, what the purpose of that is, because you have the census. The census is what counts the households and the population. And alongside the census, this NPR will be done, but as a separate, it has a separate status. It's nothing to do with the Census Act. It comes under the Citizenship Act and the rules framed under that. So this, I think, is clear. So many state governments are going to oppose it. The question may arise, can states refuse to do it? That question needs to be, it's a matter under development. The center says you are bound to obey this. Will they use any authoritarian measures against state governments which refuse to do it? Can state governments, some scholars have suggested, legal scholars, that the state governments can say that we apprehend, there are many apprehensions among the people, there's a risk or a threat to public order, and that those would be good grounds for not doing the NPR at all. Or even if you do the NPR, you can adopt a different format and so on. These matters are still unclear, but I think if they go ahead with an NRC or even an NPR as is presently contemplated and notified, in fact, there's an instruction manual that is given that. So very detailed preparations have been made. If they press ahead with this, then there'll be a confrontation between several states and the center. It will involve an assault on federalism itself, because the center is not the supreme authority. It has a preferential place in the Constitution, but the understanding is that states are sovereign in their own realm. The center is sovereign in its realm, the states are sovereign in its realm. Of course, there's a concurrent list and so on. I don't have to go into that. But federalism or quasi-federalism under the Indian Constitution is also at risk if the central government decides to pursue this matter aggressively. I don't think they have thought through all these issues. They did not expect this kind of opposition, this kind of upsurge, mass upsurge of such long duration to come up against. And the violence that broke out in Delhi, where they have completely failed for days to bring it under control, involving a large number of casualties, loss of lives, injured, loss to property, loss to livelihood, and so on. I think the responsibility is entirely, it should be pinned to them. They are responsible for this mess. The situation should not be allowed to go out of control. There have been many attacks on peaceful protesters in different parts of the country. Other rights are also at risk. So I think the situation is a complete mess. And it is our job, through such discussions, to first figure out what is at stake, what the real issues are. A lot of technical matters are involved here, but we need to come up with a clear understanding, raise public awareness, and see what the Constitution mandates, what the real values are, what the founders of the Constitution meant when what was their intention when they adopted this constitution and how all those debates after which they adopted this constitution, and how it goes against the principle of secularism, the principles of equality, liberty, equality, and fraternity that are the bedrock of our constitution. Also, how it relates to the doctrine of basic structure of the constitution, how our institutions will perform, including the higher courts, the high courts, and the judiciary, how our lawyers approach this subject, and so on, how the youth respond to the further troubles. Our chairman said that many hurdles are ahead, difficult days are ahead, it's not going to be easy. I think that is true. On the other hand, you should not, alarmism is the last thing we want. We should end with the confidence that we can defeat this and go ahead, which is why we have this whole Constitution Protection Forum. I invite all of you to join it and strengthen our hands.